I am the warrior. If this is Knuckles' jam, so will be mine. What's up, everybody? This is William. Welcome to another video where it's now my review on the Knuckles show, which was my first time watching, as I mentioned in my Sonic movie video. So I'm going to preface this by saying this watch experience is going to be fresh for me, and I'll be reviewing each episode and sharing my opinions on them along the way as I'm watching through the series without having any sort of in-advance context to what happens next. And before I get to the review, I might as well talk about what I know about the premise of the show and the fact that it's obviously a spin-off about Knuckles and his adventure training his apprentice, who was a well-known individual from the movies, to become a warrior. And I did check some reviews, and there was a lot of mixed reactions to the show. Mostly negative, because what I don't understand is the fact that Knuckles isn't primarily the character that's focused on the show, despite the title is seemingly advertising that it is about him. But you know what, that intrigues me to watch the show more, so let's get right into it. So we begin with the first episode, The Warrior, and it starts off with Sonic's narration, or let's just say recap, of the events of the second movie, which I'll preface to anyone who will be watching this spin-off for the first time, where it does take in a bit of the context of the second movie, and if you don't want to be spoiled on it, I might as well recommend you watch it before you watch the spin-off. But anyways, Sonic's narration ends when he acknowledges how Knuckles is seeming to struggle immersing himself with the environment of Earth, and we see here how he's causing a ruckus at the Wachowski residence. And it first starts with him combating the construction workers who are just trying to fix the mess that he caused, which makes them leave and reprimand Maddie, which I do feel bad for her in this spot. And considering Tom is not even there, it's definitely a struggle for her to raise these three creatures, especially Knuckles, since he's not really as familiar with the atmosphere. Considering his nature is all about battling, and having completed the Master Emerald quest, he's got no battle to do during the time being, so he's just trying to seek for his own, which is not really a great idea in the grand scheme of things. So we have Sonic trying to coax him to enjoy himself in his new residence, and he does take in Sonic's advice, but executes it in the worst way possible, where the following day, Mighty makes them breakfast, and the first thing she sees is an iron throne that Knuckles made, which we later found out came from their vehicle, so that's really just catastrophic. And on top of this, Knuckles single-handedly made the living room into a battlefield, having the family dog face off against the mailman, who was innocent to all of this and was just trying to deliver mail. And now he wants to go home, and at this point, Maddie has just had enough of Knuckles, so she grounds him. Just like that. And finally, Knuckles doesn't even know what grounded means, because I guess he was never disciplined in his life growing up. So he requires Sonic and Tails to explain to him, and he does try for some reason to snap back at Maddie, which she's the one planning to raise you moving forward, so why don't you just comply with her instead of trying to express your own convictions sometimes? So at this point, Knuckles finally gives in and casually just walks up into the attic to adhere to his punishment. So then we cut to Wade, who we know from the movies is just playing bowling, and then he's just getting distracted by this little girl, which does remind me of times when I play Outlast, where I'll try and find ways to distract other competitors so my team can win. Man, we're pretty naughty and evil. But anyways, Wade pretty much fails to score for his team, and his friend Jack decides to just throw him off his team and just rip his jacket off of him. What a great friend you are, not. So back with Knuckles, he just lays there on the floor of shame, like he would say, and Sonic will just have to swing around and just be teasing him until he suggests him activities that he can do while he's grounded, like music or games or even TikTok dancing. Good luck with going viral, Sonic, but yeah, and that is actually the last of Sonic we'll get from this spin-off. So we're stuck with Knuckles, and we just see him feel very somber in that moment until the spirits of the Chief Echidna comes and informs him he must educate someone to be a warrior, and he recommends Wade, which he shows on a newspaper. But yeah, this leads to what the story of this spin-off is going to be, the Wade and Knuckles stories. So Knuckles makes his way to Wade's home, where he's just weightlifting, and he arrives to explain that he is going to teach Wade how to become a warrior so he can assist him in becoming a champion. So they start a little road trip, which feels like a somewhat parallel with Tom and Sonic, but obviously not much gravitas to him since we had just got this dynamic, so we didn't have much time to see how their relationship goes. But anyways, while they're on their trip, it turns out they're being tracked by some Gun members named Mason and Willoughby, who already showed their malice when they used a ring portal to throw their supervisor in. But basically their intentions is to just capture Knuckles for their own benefit, and they already have weapons crafted so they can matched with his combat skills. So after that, back with the pair, where we have this very notable visual of just Knuckles snacking on some green grapes. Yeah, exactly. So then for Wade to qualify as a warrior student, he must know his battleground, which gives Wade an idea of what his battleground will be. A bowling alley, the one that we had just saw him at. And Knuckles even saying that it's a place for adult idiots. But Knuckles does participate in some bowling and he smashes it pretty well, which I mean, to be fair, his muscles are his biggest leverage to succeeding. But anyways, we do have this nice moment between Knuckles and Wade. We do get a backstory with Wade on why he loves bowling, and that is because of his father, who's like the best at it, but unfortunately for him, his dad would abandon him, which does leave some question marks. Why is he loving bowling even if it relates to his father who left him? Well, the only merit is the fact that he can try and relive the times that his dad was still with him, in the context that he would develop from what his dad taught him in bowling, which did he really though? Not much to a degree. But yeah, a decent backstory for Wade so we can get to know him more. Then those gun agents arrive and they start attacking Knuckles, with everyone who was at the bowling place running away, besides Wade, who just hides somewhere. But Knuckles does have the upper hand at first, before the agents use a ring portal to transfer him into a little box cage, and he's stuck inside. And with him captured, it pretty much what the agents needed, and they're about to take him away. However, Wade was still there and witnessed everything and knows that he cannot let Knuckles get taken away like that. So there would happen to be one of the weapons that the agents left behind. That Wade thinks of an idea to make use of it, and that ends off episode 1. So then to episode 2, where we have the agents drive a captured Knuckles to a cabin, which is around the time of dusk, which for some reason why didn't Wade react quicker? Well, it's because he pretty much sucks. But anyways, thanks to one of the weapons that the agents left behind, Wade is able to use that to his advantage when he faces them. But he is going to need more resources, so he crafts some materials and imagines himself executing his brilliant plan, which does not turn out well as we see him act on it all wrong, and it ends up blowing up his own squad car, so that's pretty unfortunate. But his little catastrophe distracted the agents well enough to investigate what's going on out there, and when Wade tries to activate the weapon he has, it goes haywire and just flies him straight into the cabin, where he faces off against Mason, and although the latter does have the upper hand at first, Wade uses Sriracha to knock out Mason, and when he arrives in the room where Willoughby is guarding Knuckles, he uses the weapon to blast open the box and free Knuckles from it. So now that he's saved, the two must get out of the cabin, and Knuckles gets Wade to piggyback him, and he springs out and glides for a lengthy time before he reaches the surface, where we humorously have him drop Wade into a dumpster. Yeah, pretty much reflecting on how Wade is just a mess. But anyways, the agents are pretty flustered with what just happened, but are still resolute on capturing Knuckles, so they're not gonna give up on the spot. Anyways, Wade and Knuckles take a vehicle and they stop by a burger place so they can have what I would just call a midnight snack, since they're in the middle of night. But Knuckles seems to be very resemble on the food and would have a more preference on grapes or Doritos, which is something I forgot to mention in the first episode, is how much he obsessed over it. But yeah, during this scene, we do get another nice bonding moment between the two, where Knuckles now opens up about his background to Wade, and we once again have him talk about struggling to settle himself a home, which we know is his biggest struggle with his settlement on Earth. But also, he signifies his history of facing betrayal, and we all know Robotnik did that to him in the second movie, so knowing that he's faced that prior definitely makes him a lot more sympathetic on that end, and Wade can obviously feel that too, as we see he got betrayed by his childhood father who left him. And although I mentioned, I should point out that his friend Jackson Clear betrayed him during the bowling alley, so the betrayed feeling is something that really attunes these two together. But anyways, they're done now. And so they're back on the road listening to music, but then on the radio, it shares some shocking news that Wade is now a fugitive and he's now being manhunted, adding a bit more urgency to the pair's adventure. So this is gonna get interesting, but with Wade's name on the chopping block, he's gonna need to find a place to, I guess, quarantine himself, and what do you know? The place that he chooses is his childhood home, where he reunites with his mother, Wendy, and the episode ends with her just fainting, which on an initial watch, you would think that she would faint at the sight of seeing her son again, but when you watch the next episode, it brings in a different context than when it was portrayed in this episode. So that's it. I do think the episode was fine enough, but it did meander a bit, and it felt a bit rushed, especially when we got to the end, which I didn't even know was the end. But yeah, things are starting to get intriguing moving forward, so we'll see how much of the potential is going to be lived up to in the next few episodes. And now we go into episode 3, where we obviously continue off with Wade reuniting with his family, with his mother greeting him, and it does turn into a conversation regarding their somewhat estrangement. And then that's when we are met with Wade's sister, Wanda, who is such a snobby sibling who also works for the FBI and constantly belittles her brother for being a local cop. So then afterwards, Knuckles introduces himself, and that causes his mom to faint, and that's why she fainted in the context of seeing Knuckles. So then we have the two enter the home with Wendy, I guess, apologizing to Knuckles for rudely fainting on him, which, fair enough, I mean. And then Wanda, despite being told Knuckles is a guest, he still does an inspection on him, using a metal scanner to check him out. And I just love how much paranoia Knuckles was expressing over just being inspected. But then afterwards, Wendy invites the two to a Shabbat dinner, which is a Jewish ceremonial meal, and in speaking of that, that's when Wade has childhood flashbacks of Wanda just straight up bullying him during the dinner. Which, I mean, to be fair, you were kids at the time. You guys are grown-ups now, so probably you wouldn't be as, physical, right? Well, so the four of them have dinner, and Knuckles, although he was pretty hesitant by the lack of grapes there, he was really enjoying the feast. While we have Wanda, Wendy, and Wade just go at it with each other, and it gets to the point where violence comes into play with either kicking each other's shoes, and then culminating with Wanda literally stabbing her brother with a fork. Seriously, how mature can you be as an FBI agent to just do that to your sibling, especially at the adult age? You should be more mature than that. And it's finally the fact that Knuckles is the only one that's acting normal during this dinner that makes it kind of out of character, because he's the one that's usually sprucing up problems like this. But I think this scene kind of is a way for Knuckles to observe and reflect on the fact that it's an example of what he has been doing when he started living in the Wachowskis, and seeing how that kind of connects with him, I think gives him an idea that stuff like this results in problems, and the result of problems leads to consequences, and unfortunately he faced those consequences when he caused those problems back at the Wachowskis. So I may be interpreting this a little strangely, but I do feel like what Knuckles just witnessed here may be a way for Knuckles to get into his senses of what it is like in his residence, because he's the one being the sorcery of the problem. But anyways, dinner was pretty much just that, and Wade just runs to his room and just isolates himself. But then Knuckles comes in to comfort him and learns a lot about what Wade likes through his posters of celebrities, and even one including the bowling champion, which happens to be his father, named Pistol Pete Whipple. And Wade also introduces Knuckles to music he likes, and I guess he does have some taste, liking Blake 182. But anyways, Wendy invites Knuckles for dessert, and they enjoy together while watching a TV show. And things may be peaceful, right? Well, no, the hunters somehow found out where Wade was hiding at, and they break into his childhood home trying to capture him. But Knuckles saves him against the first guy he attacks, and then Wanda is attacked by a guy with chains, but Knuckles is able to use the chains against him and toss him onto the shelves. And then we have the last two guys facing off Wendy, who's trying to fend herself off with frying pans, but Knuckles and everyone else joins in on the fight. And we have Wendy make one request of not having the candle lights be damaged, and all we have is this funny visual where the camera moves around the candles as we see the fight happen in the background, and obviously the Whipples get the upper hand and beat the men down, and the episode ends with the candle lights being blown out. So there's that. Okay, this episode was kind of middle of the road. We spent the entire episode in the household, and we just meander about with a bunch of conflicts that don't really amount to much. And personally, now that we're now reaching the halfway point, I don't know where the trajectory of the season is now going to go. All we know is that Wade still needs to make his way to the bowling tournament, and we still have the agents going after Knuckles. And now we know that Wade is a fugitive that's being manhunted, so there's a lot going on, and this episode didn't really fulfill a resolution to any of those. It was basically a continuation of the manhunt storyline, and considering there's 3 episodes left, we'll see where it goes from here. Now we get to episode 4, where I feel like from here on out, it becomes the climax of the series, where some of the subplots that I just mentioned would finally find its closure throughout these last few episodes, so I do like that aspect of it. But to summarize this episode, it starts off with Wade waking up in his now damaged childhood home thanks to the battle that occurred the previous night. And when Wade heads to the front porch to think everything is going to be peacefully, boy did he jinx it as he gets captured by a bounty hunter and is dragged across the street, with Wanda and Knuckles happening to come out and witness it, and they surprisingly choose not to help him, despite the danger that the Wade is clearly in, which is kind of confusing why Knuckles isn't trying to help him despite him helping him before. And his justification is the fact that a warrior must learn how to escape by themselves, which, I mean, fair enough. In this situation where Knuckles was in, he was completely trapped, where there was no escape route unless he got help, where in Wade's case, he does have opportunities to escape himself since he got more leeway, but he just doesn't recognize that. So that's an interesting training method for warriors to learn, is how to escape by themselves in a spot that they are captured. And finally now, we find out that the bounty hunter who captured Wade is none other than his ex-friend Jack Sinclair, that traitor. Wow. So anyways, he locks Wade up inside electrified barred cage, meaning if Wade tries to come in contact with the bars, it'll electrocute him. And so as Jack is escorting Wade with his truck, we have Wade try to break himself free, but obviously because the bars are electrified, it electrocutes him, and he does get knocked out and awakens in what appears to be some sort of dream, which is more so for the purpose of getting him to train himself. And he gets some assistance from the spirits of the Chief Echidna, because please, and then a dream spirit of Jack Sinclair. And we do have some funny visuals of Wade literally wearing a Knuckles costume, and then some other sorts of goofy things. Like this sequence kind of went on a bit too long and also involved some kind of rock song titled Flames of Disaster, which finally I know where that song came from, because I did use that song to correspond with one of my Knuckles fan arts I made, and I was under the impression that it was the theme song, which I was wrong. So now finally knowing where it came from, it wasn't even Knuckles who even sang it was Jack Sinclair. But anyways, after this long dream sequence, Wade is finally able to get into his senses and find his strength to escape from the cage that he was locked in, and his way was blasting through the roof of the cage, which I don't know why Jack Sinclair did not try and check the sturdiness of it. But anyways, Wade is able to rescue himself, but of course it wouldn't end right there without one final showdown between him and Jack. And with the help of some witnesses who happen to be there, it adds a bit more dramaticness to it, where Jack and Wade are going to go into a duel with swords, which are very sharp, and Jack hands one of his swords to Wade, and they're going to charge at each other on their vehicles to duel it out, where Jack has a bit of an advantage because he's riding a motorcycle, and Wade is just borrowing a bicycle from one of the children. But despite the advantage Jack had, he somehow just fumbles so terribly, and Wade wins the duel, as well as using the sword to chop off a part of Jack's long hair. Get wrecked. And because Wade won the duel, Jack now must surrender what he has to Wade, where the man first demands for his jacket, and then his shirt, and then his shirt underneath. Which did worry at me at first if Wade was getting a bit too excessive over his desires, but no, he just wanted to keep all the good stuff and leave Jack with absolutely nothing but a tank top and some lame old pants. As great comeuppance for the betrayal he caused in the first episode, so I think this was a really good way to culminate that storyline, even though it was never really something that was completely focused on properly. But anyways, now with Jack out of the way, Wade takes the motorcycle and heads back to the Whipple residence, where Wanda and Knuckles are surprised to see him, with Knuckles now being aware that Wade has fully succeeded the training of rescuing yourself, meaning that he is qualified to be a warrior. So now we have Knuckles and Wade riding a motorcycle with Wanda and Wendy behind in a vehicle, making their way to where the bowling tournament is going to take place. So that is the ending of the episode, and I am kind of mixed on it, which this one in general kind of got me understanding why there's a lot of mixed reactions with this show, considering Knuckles barely got any minute of screen time in this episode, so it really allowed me to understand why some people would label this the Wade show, and I can get that sentiment. But you know what, I feel like this episode was a way for Wade to really apply and develop himself what Knuckles had taught him, and with him being able to succeed in that throughout this episode was satisfying enough for me that did not make me feel like it harmed the show too much, even though there was a lot of meandering about. But overall, I am getting excited for the final few episodes, considering we are about to see Wade really tap into his warrior mold. And now we get into episode 5, where they arrive at Reno, and they enter the main building, where as Wade and Knuckles are settling themselves, Wanda and Wendy try to make some offerings to Knuckles, which Wade rejects it on his behalf. And that is when he sees his long-lost father, Pistol Pete, and Wade really wants to greet him as a way for a nice little reunion, but he's also pretty nervous and hesitant about it, which I can understand. It's kind of an uneasy feeling to see someone that you haven't seen for a long time. And most of the hesitation does stem from how they perceive you, whether they are gonna even recognize you or do they not like you anymore, so on and so forth. Like, there are many thoughts that go through your head in this spot, so I can understand why Wade is expressing a lot of hesitation, but Knuckles is able to comfort him in this spot and help him create this nice reunion with his father. And with a secret AirPod in his ear connected with Wade, he's able to guide Wade what to say when he interacts with his father, and so he does. And although awkward at first because it sounds like Wade is repeating words, eventually it stops because some mascot who looks like Knuckles interacts with him. So now Wade gets to talk more freely with his dad, and the reunion was a lot more nicer than I thought it would be. And the two quickly bond over how much they miss each other. But before we can continue on, we cut to a scene where Mason and Willoughby, the agents that we probably forgot was coming after Knuckles, are somehow kidnapped and are on the verge of execution for their failure to hand over Knuckles to, I guess, the buyer. And before he can execute them, Willoughby uses the magic of her words alongside some strong verbatim that convinces the buyer to give her and Mason one last chance to get Knuckles, or else their lives are over. So he releases them, and they're now back on track to capturing Knuckles once again. So we return back with Wade and Pete, who are competing in the tournament and are the winners of the semifinals, so they qualify to the final round. Good for them. But they continue their bonding section where Pete finally gives a story on why he left and abandoned his family, and tries to find ways to justify it by presenting some CDs Wade likes to him, which, okay. But in the end, Pete does apologize to Wade for abandoning him, even though something like that kind of comes off very insincere in a way, which I would be able to pick on, considering if you're going to apologize, at least make a phone call or something, not just have to suddenly wait for the person to be physically reunite with you in order to do so. So that kind of loses some of your generosity there. And we do have Wendy spot the two having a conversation and just avoid any sort of eye contact. And once Wade makes his way to the hotel room where he meets up with his mother, she does give him a warning that her ex-husband is capable of just sweet-talking those to get what he desires, which can usually be done in a very cunning style. Which Wade tries to reassure that it's okay after their nice reunion bond. But then as we see Wendy make her way to the elevator, guess who's there? Agent Mason. Like, it wouldn't be a shocker for us to recognize who it was. And next thing, Wade's dad invites him to the top floor, where the man gives him the biggest surprise of all, with an apology to come with it, but not an apology for what he done in the past, but what he's going to do in the present, which is that he's secretly associated with those corrupt agents who now hold Wade's family at hostage. Which quickly proves Wendy's claims to be correct and how Wade was pretty much blinded by his dad's words. And in full context, the reason why Wade is doing this is to make sure that he is the only one that's going to win the tournament, considering if Wade is there, it has a competition aspect to it, but if Wade doesn't appear and is having to deal with the agents instead, that means Pete would automatically win the tournament. Which in that light really emphasizes on his selfishness, which was clearly apparent when he abandoned his family, but I think this act Pete did really cements that. So now with Pete making his way to the tournament, Wade is going to have to deal with the agents himself, where in order to keep his family safe, he must surrender Knuckles to the agents since that's what they wanted to begin with. And to make things even more robust is the fact that when Wade is going to get Knuckles, he has to stay on the phone line with them so they know that he's not doing anything sneaky in between. So he's really backed into a corner here, and he has no choice but to relent and head to the hotel room to get Knuckles to go up. In doing so, lying to him about a surprise that's on the top floor, so that convinces him to go up. And once Knuckles and Wade enter the elevator, Wade has the excuse to say that he forgot his tag, so Knuckles will be going up on the elevator alone. And with the agents ready to shoot him once he reaches the top floor, oh, something is going to go down. And that right there was the conclusion of the penultimate episode. Wow. We are already getting down to the nitty gritty and things have now gone intense. So you know what, let's have less time me wasting a breath and let's get to me summarizing the final episode. So it's episode 6, the finale, and we will continue where we left off with Knuckles approaching the top floor in the elevator where the agents are about to ambush him, and when Wade updates the agents that Knuckles is almost up, the agents charge up their weapons and blast as soon as the elevator doors open, but only to make the shocking discovery that the only thing they blasted was a mascot, which Knuckles so happened to be hiding on the ceiling of the elevator and ambushed them instead, knocking them backwards. And that's when the reveal is that Knuckles was listening the whole time, dropping the little earpiece slash AirPod that he was wearing, which we all remember that he had in the last episode. So that was a really cool revelation to all of this. And now we have this battle with Knuckles and the agents while Wade is able to make his way to the top and free his family. Well, I'll just say his mom, Wendy, because Wanda is too stubborn to have her brother free her and would rather do her method of freeing from cuffs considering she's FBI, and her way of doing it is dislocating her thumb. Like, you can't be serious. And especially in a spot where your brother can literally unlock you. Like, how biased could you be? But back with Knuckles, he's able to end the battle by deflecting the agent's rain poles out them, sending them somewhere else where they were never seen again. So that ends off that storyline with the agents because they messed with the wrong warrior, with what Wade would say. So the ordeal's over with, and oh yeah, Wanda did break free of her cuffs by dislocating her thumb, and that visual was just disturbing. Don't ever show something like that again. But now Knuckles urges Wade to scurry his way to the tournament since that was the main goal of this adventure. So the four of them make their way there, and Pete is obviously there and seemingly tries to declare himself as the winner since Wade is not present despite the announcer's attempts to introduce him. But Wade finally makes his entry and we get this very awkward insult match between the two, with Pete in particular being as cocky, which is what champions are normally good at. But anyways, the final competition begins and the two bowl, where they both make good strikes, and also on top of that, Wade's partner is none other than the little girl named Susan who was from the first episode distracting him, so it was great to see her now on his side after the wonkiness with their relationship initially. And we do have Knuckles watching the tournament from a TV screen, but then he hears commotion outside, and when he investigates, he's got in some chains and pulled by another than the buyer, who is now operating a literal mechanical machine, because I guess he found out Willoughby and Mason failed and took matters into his own hands, which is like, if this is what your approach was, then you should have done it to begin with and rely on others. But anyways, Knuckles is in trouble, and in the tournament is the final round where Pete, despite him being the bowling champion, suffers a spare. So Wade has this opportunity to outmatch his father, and he makes his strike, and they do this dramatic effect where he is able to knock down a majority of his pins, and he only has one more left where it almost remains standing, but it eventually falls down, officially declaring Wade as the winner, beating out his champion father, Pistol Pete. Which, who is the loser now after he tried to initially call his son the loser. But then just as everyone's celebrating, Knuckles crashes through the walls because the buyer is attacking him and trying to get his powers, and Wade, knowing that his warrior master is in trouble, cannot refrain from this and immediately goes and faces off against the buyer. And while although he does seem powerless, his family comes rushing in with a weird bowling vehicle where it contains bowling balls because they're heavy enough to cause damage, and with the help of some mechanical gloves that Wade gets to wear, it leverages his strengths a bit. But just before he attacks, Knuckles seemingly gets his powers absorbed into the buyer's machines, and he is tossed onto the ground unconscious. And this is when Wade, as he is striking the buyer's machine with bowling balls, tries to give a speech to Knuckles that he developed himself a lot thanks to him, and how he wants Knuckles to feel himself at home with what he's done. And after Wade runs out of balls, Knuckles is able to regain his consciousness, pounce onto the buyer's machine where he's able to absorb all his powers back, and is able to destroy most of the machine. And Wade uses the power glove he has and launches it at a giant ball, which knocks it over, and Knuckles uses it to make the final blow by dropping it onto the buyer, completely crushing him to death, and ending off the final battle right there. So back inside the bowling alley, Pete tries to steal the trophy, but Wade and his family are able to stop him before he can try and get away with it, since that trophy rightfully belongs to Wade now because he's the winner, not Pete. And I think it was great comeuppance that Wendy and Wanda would be the one to knock out Pete, and also because Pete clearly comes off as a sore loser in this spot where his first time losing and he can't even accept the reality and is a poor sport about it, where although he's not really expressing it, his actions show right there that he doesn't want to accept the outcome of him losing. So yeah, but anyways, Wade takes back the trophy and we have the final scene with them making their way back to Green Hills. And to end it all off, Wade presents Knuckles a song, which happens to be Warrior by Scandals, and this is where I can mention that that song is the theme song for the show, which is really good because that song is a great one-hit wonder from that group. And it's awesome to see this show really spruce it up to the modern viewers so they are introduced to this wonderful song. And to be honest, because of this show, I've just been blasting this music non-stop, and considering my birthday was passing by not too long ago, I played this as my birthday song as well. So thank you, Knuckles show. But yeah, that is the ending of the episode. I think it was a very satisfying conclusion to the Wade storyline, where thanks to Knuckles, he really developed himself to be a warrior in such ways where he can be able to succeed in bowling, which was his biggest problem at the beginning of the series. But I'll be honest, this does come with some missed potential where this could have been a great transition into the third movie if anything of substance was going to lead into it, which unfortunately didn't. And the only sort of context this show had into the third movie is showcasing why Wade was guarding the Master Emerald, because Knuckles elected him to do so after his adventure in him training to become a warrior. There's that, and another thing I wish this show would have done, although minor, not really something to amount to much, but it would have been cool to see the Wachowskis' reactions to what Knuckles was doing, because clearly, last time they were there, Knuckles was grounded, and considering he did sneak off and adventured with Wade to go to Reno, they should have known he was out for a bit, and it would have been interesting to see the reactions when Knuckles came back. Like, I want to know what Sonic, Tails, and Maddie were thinking. And you know what? It could have been great if there was any sort of mention of that in the third movie, but no. So I do feel like there is a lot to be desired in this spot, but you know, it is what it is. And if they do happen to make a second season, I'm definitely tuning in to see what they do with it. So that wraps up my Knuckles review, and with my thoughts on it, I understand why it's not really that revered, because it stems from somewhat false advertising where it's not really a show about Knuckles and it shines on the character of Wade more. But for me, I feel like I like this aspect because it gives more time for Knuckles to be that character to shape someone else to be successful, and for him being able to succeed in getting that person to develop is something that I do find as a satisfying storyline. And I did enjoy a lot of aspects of this show, which I did find a lot of it to be goofy as well, considering how much we meandered about with these like constant silliness and all sorts. So I am coming out of this show being mostly positive on it. And you know, I understand that it's probably a hot take that I do like the show more than most of the general fan base. Now, to be fair, everyone is always entitled to their own opinions, so there's no right and wrong in that situation, but for what I want to argue here is the fact that I do like a lot of the creativity that the show encompassed, and it tries something at least groundbreaking that keeps me intrigued to what's to come. Even though there is a lot of flaws this show has, which is pretty apparent after watching the episodes, but it didn't harm my overall experience with it, and I had a lot of fun with the show and the story of Knuckles training someone to be a champion. With that, I appreciate you all tuning in, and expect more videos like this down the road when there's any sort of show that I want to make either a review or video on, and I'll pretty much be continuing to make more YouTube videos down the road. Thanks, and I'll see each and every one of you in another video.